feel like I'm on.
Okay.
I feel like I'm on a dating game here.
Yes, well, it'll be a little bit like the dating game where it's a little anonymous
Yes.
until we learn more
That's
about
okay.
each other, and we'll see if we want to go on a first date after this.
Okay, so I would go ahead and do a slate for audio. This is for whoever's editing this in the future. Audio slate 2 source.
Welcome to another installation of Talking with Strangers. This is the third installment. And the name of the game is I'm talking to a stranger. I don't know who is on the other line, and looking forward to having an intriguing conversation. I don't know which way the conversation is going to go. I've got a few questions, a few template questions I've crafted for the program, just in case we run out of things to talk about. But hopefully we'll have plenty to talk about. And so, guest, Chris, I just want to make sure my audio is up.
I believe so.
So, guest, please tell me, what is your name?
It's Bob Smietana.
One of the things I first try to pinpoint is, where's my guest located? You sound like an American. Is that true?
I live in Illinois.
Oh, well, hot diggity. And what do you do for work?
I'm a national reporter for Religion News Service. So I'm a journalist who covers religion.
Oh.
So and I've got a new book called Reorganized Religion. It was just out out in August.
What's the thesis of the book?
So it's kind of,
Who is it intended
sure.
for?
It's intended for anyone interested in organized religion, ministers, church members, and the general public. It's got kind of two theses. One is a look at why organized religion in the U.S. is declining. So the number of people who identify as religious is in decline, and the number of people who are members of congregations is declining. And the average congregation is shrinking. So the average congregation used to be 20 years ago was 137 people. Now it's 65. And so we have this kind of decline for a whole bunch of reasons. And then the other part of the book is about so how do we get to this point? And, what's the status quo? And then where do we go from here? The other part of the book is to remind people that organized religion plays a pretty important role in our culture as part of the social safety net. It creates social capital. There are all kinds of ministries and social service programs that are created by churches, and they kind of perform, and churches and other faith groups provide an anchor in their communities. So if they're all gone and there's nothing to replace them, then that will affect all of us. So it's kind of a twofold argument, but it's kind of to give people an understanding of why religion is declining. Because people think mostly it's about belief or because they did something wrong, and there's some of that, but it's a lot about the kind of overarching social factors.
Huh, interesting. So, I've got a few thoughts here. First is, it sounds like you and I might be on the same page on a lot of life's important questions, even just from learning more about your book and what your thesis is. It's an intriguing thesis that while there is church decline, that's undeniable, the data is the data, there's interpretation over what explains the decline. And for a lot of folks out there, they think that it's belief systems that are leading to a decline in church numbers and in affiliation or self-identification as of a Christian. But what you're saying is actually there's a decent chunk that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Bob, you're saying that there's a decent chunk that it's because, for example, social safety net has grown from other sources outside.
No, it's more so that part of the social safety net is that's actually in decline too, and that we rely on that, and so we don't have a spot. We actually don't have a place. If those kind of that social capital and that social safety net that's based in faith-based groups declines because all the people disappear, then that's going to leave a hole in the culture, leave the hole that people would depend on, and people won't recognize that hole is there till they need it. It's like a bridge, right? You don't notice the bridge is out until the bridge is out, but you rely on it. Yeah. So it's the same sort of thing. They provide a real important role.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
But it seems like, to use the bridge analogy, it's a two-way street, though, right? Because couldn't we recognize that because the church historically has been a social safety net for many people, this should be an opportunity for Christians to sort of step up when people are struggling. Is that fair?
That could be, yeah, and they already do. But yes, so one of the challenges for churches is that they're asked to do all the things that they used to do, but with fewer resources and fewer people.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the social factors in that are, it's mostly, I mean, one of the predominant ways is birth rate, right? People stop, the way you grow a church or any faith movement is to practice that faith, have kids, bring them up in the kids, bring them up in the faith, and then when you pass away, they carry it on. So in America, especially among white Christians, Americans have fewer babies. So if you have fewer kids, there's fewer kids to go to church, and then if the churches don't retain those kids because because of a loss of faith in institutions, because going to church is not seen as the thing that people do when they want to be good. There's less of this kind of social pressure to go to churches. So if you have fewer kids and you retain fewer of them, you're going to have smaller congregations.
Right.
And the second thing that's happened is most people, if they go to church, go to really big churches. So you have this kind of Walmart effect as well. So the kind of average neighborhood church is in trouble. Then you have this overall thing where I'm about to have a granddaughter. So she's due next week.
Congrats.
So I like to tell people that when I was born in 1965. So the country when I was born was mostly white, mostly Christian. The men were in charge. The nuclear family was the center of life, and going to church is what you did if you wanted to be a good person, or going to some kind of worship service. So the world we live, my granddaughter, when she's born, she's going to be born into a country that's multi-ethnic. There'll be no ethnic majority among her peer group. It's increasingly egalitarian, LGBT affirming, and the fastest growing religious sector in the country are the so-called nuns, which are people who have no religion. So it's entirely, but churches were built for that first world, which was a world in which was mostly white and mostly Christian, in which they were kind of in a privileged position, and people would come to them. So what you would do to attract people is to try to prove people, when they were looking for a church, that your church was the best, or your faith, particular faith, was the best faith for them. Well, now you have millions and millions of people who are not interested in religion, who don't think going to church or going to a worship service has anything to do with them, or they might be spiritual, but they don't think being part of a congregation is important.
Do you make moral evaluations? Like, do you think these shifts, these changes are a bad thing? Or are you just reporting the facts?
So I'm reporting. So because I'm a journalist, I'm a reporter first. I tend to think of myself like the scouting team. I go out and say, like, here's all the information that you need to know, and then you need to decide. But it's certainly clear that you are losing some essential things. So there are folks who cover the religious sociologists, for example, would say that. So Mark Chaves, who's at Duke University, has this idea that if you look at mega churches, and this is not to diss mega churches, right? There are lots of churches that do all kinds of good work. Sure. But one of the kind of trends in mega churches, the larger the church is, that people go less often, they give less, and they participate less, they volunteer less. Mm-hmm. So you could look at a really large church and say these big churches are a sign of religious success. He suggests that they're a sign of religious decline, that you really have had a hollowing out of really kind of strong local institutions. And so you built really big churches, but they're more fragile, less connected. And so, and what you lose is the kind of church in the neighborhood. And so we have about 350,000 congregations in the U.S., mostly churches. But, if half of them could be in danger of closing, and it's mostly the ones in neighborhoods. And if you lose those churches in neighborhoods, they're never coming back, right? You can never build a church in a neighborhood anymore because people don't want it. It's just the whole not in my big backyard issue. It's cost prohibitive. Zoning is a problem, so you're not going to get those back. And the fact that churches are everywhere gives a kind of penetration to or a saturation of the culture, so that one reason the churches are able to deliver or to respond when something goes wrong. So they were able to run a food pantry, for example, or do disaster relief, is that they have congregations in the community where people live. And so if you only end up having congregations in places where people don't live, then you're going to have to drive to them. You're not going to have that kind of connection between the outside community and the church or among people in the church. Yeah. So something is lost there.
So when I'm hearing you, I mean, I'm almost, and again, I know you're just sort of reporting the facts, but I am sensing that you think that is a social loss. Is that fair? And you think that we shouldn't lose that?
I think it's something really to be concerned about. I think this is kind of the way I describe it in the book, I put it this way. My wife and I just moved to Woodstock. We bought this house, which we love, but the kitchen is too small. And so we could make the kitchen bigger by blowing out one of the walls.
Yep.
But the wall we would take out is a bearing wall. So if we took that wall out, we don't put anything in its place, then
house is going to fall apart.
The house is going to fall apart, which is a bad thing. So that's one of the big points of it. That is that in general this happens. Then you also have the loss of the way that it shapes people's lives, right? Mm-hmm. So the people have this loss of community. They have loss of people to this. I kind of describe it. There's this term in the Apostles' Creed, the communion of saints, which I have just kind of described in the book as this kind of relationships.
Yep.
And interdependency among people that is lost when you don't have these things. And so who's going to be there when your life falls apart, or when you're rejoicing, or when you want to do something to make the community better? It kind of the organized. So I'm talking, about organized religion because I'm not a pastor, right? So I'm not talking about and because I cover every faith group, I have to be careful about not promoting my own.
Sure.
But I can be honest about that this is really important in people's lives, and it has been important in my life. And so if you lose this, what's going to happen? And the other thing I try and point out in the book is that all of us our lives have all been shaped by people who came before us, right? All these congregations were built by people in the past who built these communities that not just so that they could thrive, but so that their neighbors could thrive too. They're meant to be a place that both grows the congregation and the people in the church, but also is a blessing or benefit to the community. Yeah. Help build a world where everyone can thrive. And so a lot of energy and effort and time has gone into building things that we all depend on by people in the past who didn't know us. So if you were to go through your own life and think about all the institutions or communities that shape your life, maybe the church you grew up in, or the school you went to, or maybe you've been to a faith-based hospital, right? Or whatever other kind of thing that's impacted your life. All those things were built by other people and you benefit from.
Yep.
So there is also this call that if you let that all go, that is going to impact people in the future, because those institutions, those communities won't be around for other people when they show up in need.
Yeah, they won't have that opportunity.
Yeah, that need could be spiritual, that need could be personal, that need could be financial or physical, but they won't have, that community won't be there for them to join.
Yeah. I'm curious, in your book, do you get into research at all looking at younger generations and the use of technology?
Not too much of that, but I do get into younger generations. In younger generations, they're more likely to be nuns. They're more likely to, they're less likely to identify religion. Among young Americans, too, the number of Christians of color and the number of white Christians are about equal. So that's a different world than older Americans, where it's mostly white and a few people of color. Now, so if you're going to go to church among young people, chances are you might be a person of color. So that's going to be a change for churches, right? Because they're going to have to diversify.
I think it's interesting seeing, American demographics shifting and changing. I think, at least I'm hopeful that for My perception of American evangelicalism coming out of the 20th century is that a lot of American evangelicals believed that the American church was the center of the global church, and it represented Christianity. I mean, and maybe that was true for like a season, but that's not always required. Like, the global church is far greater and bigger than American Christianity. And so recognizing that, hey, there are Christians in other nations and other skin colors, and the way they do church is different than the way we do church. I think that's helpful in the sense that we can realize church can be done differently.
Yeah, and I think if you also look at what is a typical American Christian, in the past, it was that person was white, and that's increasingly not the case. And so that changes too. What does an American Christian look like? But how America, because Americans have a lot of money and influence, it is going to shape the way churches are formed outside of the country.
Yeah. All right. So let me ask, when you wrote this book, so Reorganized Religion, was it, I know we've been talking about churches, so for me that there's the connotation of Christian churches, but did you look at other world religions or just Christianity?
It's mostly Christianity in the U.S. because that's what I cover.
I got you.
Though other congregations are having some of these effects. Catholics are having some of the effects. So I covered, and it's mostly about Protestants. The Catholic Church is having the same problem. If you look in St. Louis right now, they're about to shutter half of the congregation, half the parishes, because they don't have the people anymore. They're no longer sustainable. One thing that probably will happen in the future, that may happen in the future. So the Pew Research Center, which does a lot of public polling and survey analysis, has done some projections that in the next 50 years, the number of Christians in the country, the percentage of Christians is going to continue to decline, mostly because of birth rates. And I should say that this is across every kind of church. So it used to be the idea that a conservative church will grow and a liberal church won't. And that some of that happened because the more mainline churches were older and they stopped having children sooner. But now evangelicals have caught up with that. So you look at the Southern Baptist Convention. In the last 15 years, they've lost 2 million people. The Missouri Synod Lutheran, very conservative church, also in decline. So pretty much any denomination that's mostly white is in decline. But what you'll end up is a country where the Christian folks, the non-Christian folks, and the people of different religions will be closer to being peers. There won't be wide gaps between them.
Sure, yeah. Although from what I understand, and you're going to be more knowledgeable on the stats here, even non-Christian faiths in America still comprise a very small percentage, like 5%, 6%.
Yeah, it's going to be closer to 10 or 15%.
Sure.
Still smaller.
Yeah.
But yeah, they won't be dominant, but they will be more, it'll be closer. The gap will be closer. It won't be 7 or 8 to 1, it might be 2 to 1.
Yeah.
So that's a different kind of relationship than when you were outnumbered, or when they were outnumbered 8 or 9 to 1.
Yeah, and my personal experience has been, I've been exposed to different world religions even when I was a kid, going to public school in the western suburbs of Chicago, diverse area, Hindus, Muslims. I live in the western suburbs now, and Carroll Stream has a large percentage of Indians, and so it's just highly diverse. And I imagine my experience is quite different from even a lot of Americans in that regard. Most don't have that sort of ideological or religious exposure as others. So yeah, that's one of the other things that's happened is what I don't know if you're familiar with a term called the big sort. No. Okay, so the big sort is the name of a book. Basically, even as we become more diverse as a country, the people tend to have moved and congregated among people who they look like, think like, vote like, and believe like. So there's been much more consolidation of people into kind of homogeneous groups. Birds of a feather flock together is the old adage. Yeah, exactly. Right. So you're not going to have. So some parts of the country you'll have lots of diversity. Other parts of the country you'll have very little diversity. Yeah. So this is actually, I am starting to
hypothesized that this is one of the challenges for American Christian leaders and churchgoers, because if the average churchgoer goes to a church with 300 or 400 people, and the leaders of those bigger congregations, when they go to church, they see a thriving, growing, homogeneous group of people. When they get out in the culture, though, they realize that they're not doing so well. Right? That the general culture doesn't have that same thing at the church. So they have this disconnect. They think, well, they extrapolate that all the churches in the country are just like theirs, doing really well. When in fact, most churches are not doing real well. And most of the people have ended up leaving those churches. So they're all struggling. And the general culture is less Christian. So it's less likely to believe the things that churches do.
Yeah.
And the other kind of challenge with churches is that there's a lot of transactional relationships. So in some churches, you have to believe everything that the leaders say and do what the leaders tell you to do. And if you do those things, then you're loved. If you don't, then you're out. So people know, there's not a kind of, the belonging is very transactional. But it goes the other way too. People now go to church expecting what they want. And if the pastor doesn't give them what they want, then they'll just go find a new church.
Right. Yeah, that's the entertainment style. I was mentioning.
Yeah, or it's entertainment, and more often it's politics right now. You don't have the right kind of politics or right kind of views on social issues or whatever it is. People will leave. And that could be in progressive and conservative churches.
Sure.
So you have a lack of kind of belonging and willing to stick with one another. And when you had more congregational governance in these churches and local churches, you have to work out your differences, right? You have to get in a meeting and work out how you're going to make things happen. Well, now you have churches that are run sort of top down, where it's all run by the staff. So you don't have that kind of those muscles on how to work through agreement. And people just go if they don't like it, they go somewhere else. So it makes it harder to build the kind of robust community. So it's the kind of sociological part. So there's the religious spiritual part of it, right? But there's also the kind of human, organized, communal part and those muscles have really declined.
Yeah. So I'm sensing you really have a concern here, a social concern, and you mentioned, that for individuals there's a personal loss, like relationally, maybe physically, perhaps even psychologically, right? As that plays into our relationships, and that this is headed sort of in the wrong direction, and that it would be bad if these churches, the neighborhood churches, close. So let me ask you, I am curious, so you've sort of kept your own cards at a distance. So do you, if you're willing to, and of course feel free to reject my question altogether, do you identify as a Christian?
Yes, and I'm pretty open about that. I just am not, I'm pretty careful, and I'll tell you why I'm careful. So, because not to answer you, so I'm very open about my own experience of this. The reason I don't talk about it a lot is that most people, one of it because of my job, but also because when most people talk about religion in America, they're doing one of two things. They are saying, here's why my beliefs are right, and I want you to know them. Or here's why your beliefs are wrong, and I want to tell you why you're wrong.
Yeah.
And they never listen to understand what the other person believes. So I spend a lot of time listening, because I already know what I think, and I don't know what other people think. So there's kind of a gift to be able to listen to other folks.
So, Bob, you mentioned that you are open, that you are a Christian. One of the things that stood out to me is you, and I agree with you, that frequently we're so quick to want to tell people about what we think is the truth and yet say what's wrong about their views. I agree with you that that's very frequent. At the same time, one concern I have is sort of over the relativization of truth, that it's sort of this subjective, that's true for you but not for me. And so would you say that even though we are quick not to listen and understand, nevertheless there are these truths that we believe that you believe, and so I mean, even at the end of the day, you think someone is mistaken or uninformed. Is that still an accurate position you would hold?
Yes, I would think so.
But you really want to understand people to get to know them better, perhaps to hear their background, their story.
And to understand their sort of way of shaping the world. And so because, and that's in part because that's what I do. I mean, my job is to report on people of every faith group. And so that's, it's very different than being, so there's a difference between being a religion reporter and being a religious reporter, if that makes sense. I mean, one role is to articulate a certain view in faith and say this is the way faith should be practiced, or Christianity should be practiced, or whatever faith it is. One is to say this is how it is practiced, and you can make evaluations about that, but it's a descriptive more than a proscriptive.
Right. Yeah, I totally get it. Let me ask you, so in your varieties of experiences, what's sort of been the most intriguing interview subject that you've had?
Oh, sure. So my most interesting story ever is a story called, it's a story about a group of end times. There's a group about a Pentecostal church that turned into a group of end times believers who worship their pastor and also rescued cats.
Rescued cats.
And it's called Apocalypse Meow. So it's one of the most, if you look up my name in Apocalypse Meow, it was in the Nashville.
So I'm laughing because there's, Apocalypse Now. That's the title of a book
it's Apocalypse
and some films,
Meow,
but Apocalypse Meow. I mean, is this like a for real cult, or are these?
Yeah, no, it's a for real group. It's a for real group. It's a really interesting group too, because I'll tell you what's interesting about it. One is I learned about it. Actually, I learned about it after writing about a group that was a cult in the music industry. So do you know the song "How Great Is Our God"?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's Chris Tomlin, right?
So, Chris Tomlin. He was he recorded it. The guy who co-wrote it used to be involved in this kind of cult of personality that was very abusive that I wrote about, and that actually led me to writing about this other cultish group. But what's interesting about it? So it made me think about a couple things. So what makes someone join a kind of cult of personality, right? So some of it is about that it makes you feel special, and that people don't bring you in by saying, "Oh, we worship cats." They bring you in by saying, we have some special knowledge about worshiping God, and we'll really love you, and you get to be part of this community. And then by the time you get involved, you get too deep, you'll go along with pretty much anything because you've
bought in.
The cost of leaving is too high. And so it kind of reveals something about how, so you think one of the reasons I cover what I would call sort of weird or kind of out of the mainstream religion is because it does give you some insights. It's kind of a sideways looking at the way faith works. So some of it, sometimes things that are, one, if I were to tell you, for example, that I was going to lead a revolution in America because a bush that was on fire told me to, you might think that's a little strange. If I were to tell you I got enlightenment because I sat under a tree and all of a sudden I understood the mysteries of the universe, you might say that's a little strange. If I were to say I went in a cave and an angel talked to me and I started a religion, or if I know this guy who walks on water and that's how I know he's God, that would sound strange, but it doesn't sound strange to us because we know these stories, right? So one is to say that to an outsider, any religious belief sounds weird or strange. The other part is that it's easy to think that because you're special, the rules don't apply to you. So we see this in all kinds of congregations. In fact, that's one of the things I cover, a lot of religious abuse and misconduct. And kind of one of the things you always see is that when there is a leader or a few leaders and they have direct line to God and no accountability, bad things happen. So you can say, I mean, in the apocalypse, this is an abusive group, and it was a very strange group, and it was really interesting to write about. And we wrote about some of the abuse, we wrote about some of the weirdness of it, but also it's kind of a reminder that that faith can really be misused pretty easily. But it doesn't start by you don't ask for the most. You don't ask someone to worship your pastor at the beginning. You bring him in slowly, and then they don't realize where they are until it's too late, so they can't see. But also, it's a kind of reminder that not everyone has the best experience of faith. Not everyone trusts in spirituality because it can be misused. And there are things in churches that can be done the same way. There are places where people say we can't speak against the pastor, or the rules don't really apply to that pastor because they're special, right? And the minute you start saying the rules don't apply to you, then you have problems.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we're getting the rise of the nuns. What's interesting is, the rise of the nuns is not, for people unfamiliar here, it's not per se the rise of atheists or agnostics. It's just people who don't identify, and maybe they have spiritual beliefs. Maybe they think there's a supernatural being, or maybe they even think God exists, but they just don't affiliate with a church.
Yeah, and some of the reasons they don't affiliate churches is because they've had bad experiences. Some reason they've just never found out that it matters to be part of a church because it was transactional, right? Because they were loved until they did something that made them unloved, and they were kind of outcast. and one of the things that challenges for churches right now is this idea of the big sort, so that people have sorted themselves into kind of homogeneous communities. Well, then you, especially with politics, you know who the enemy is. And the way you get things done in a polarized country is to tell people who the enemy is. So I was listening to a sermon about, how the left is evil, right? The pastor gives a story about the left is evil, the left this, the Democrats this. And then it started talking about their evangelism campaign. And I thought, well, anyone who might be more progressive or doesn't vote the way you do is never going to come to your church. Because you've already told them that you hate them and they're the enemy. So why would they ever come? So if you tell people they aren't welcome, then they'll get the message. So it may be that and you have, in American religion, the most devout, by any measure, devout people that read the Bible most, pray most, go to church most are Black Christians, Black Protestants. They vote predominantly Democrat, right? Many of them hold the same beliefs as, say, white evangelical Christians. They vote completely different. So, and each group thinks that they're voting the right way. So you can get a message on either side that, well, if you don't vote our way, you are not real Christians. You see that often in white evangelical spaces.
Yep.
But you see this kind of idea that we know who God is voting for. And, I'm not, again, not going to tell people who God wants you to vote for, but there is a message when you say, I know who God wants me to vote for, then there's a message that if you didn't vote my way, that you must not like God.
So giving a recent example with the Georgia runoff, the Georgia Senate runoff race, I watched a little short clip of a preacher praying that Senator Warnock's victory was already secured with God's providential plan. It's like, oh, wait a second. So yeah, you do see it on both sides.
Yeah. But then if you didn't agree with that, then you'd get the message that, wait, I'm against God's providential plan, right? Right. So and it's really, and what we have right now is this kind of this real push in the outside culture to polarize. Because it's very effective. So we have people agree on all kinds of issues across different political boundaries, but the political leaders don't get anything done because it doesn't help them win elections, right? And you don't want to compromise the other side. And so if you have, again, if you have religious leaders taking part in that polarization, it's not to say you can't be religious or a pastor and have ideas about moral issues and things. It's the kind of idea that once you buy into the demonizing others, and everything else in society is polarizing, right? Social media is polarizing. 24/7 cable news is polarizing.
Yeah, I think we really have demonized people, and so I consider myself a moderately conservative evangelical. I see that it's not beneficial to do that. It doesn't help. So, like, the best thing you can do, if you want to defeat your enemy, your ideological enemy, don't bury them in the ground. You need to win them over to your side. And so how do you get that done? Is a very different strategy than just taking a shovel and digging a hole and pushing them in.
And some of the things that church leaders knew how to do, and other religious leaders knew. What do they know how to do? So we're in a time of real change in the culture, right? And there's a lot of rethinking about who we've been and who we're going to be in the future. And when you do that, sometimes you think we did these things really well. We didn't do these things as well, right? And you have to examine yourselves. So what do churches and other religious groups know how to do? They know how to help people examine themselves. They know how to help people seek forgiveness for the things they've done wrong. They know how to help people make amends and to have a vision for a bigger community where everyone can thrive. They know how to help people find an identity even in difficult times and in changing cultures, right? There's a whole history in the church or another face of adapting to new places and learning how to be a good neighbor in different places, right? That's churches have all these skills and experiences and real gifts to offer to the world that the world needs right now. And if churches choose to do that, we'll have a different world than we will have that if people just buy into polarization and say, what I'm going to do is buy into throw some more gasoline on the fire. And it doesn't mean that the kind of things that churches fight about aren't important, right? There's theology is important. There's issues of ethics. These are all important issues. But if the house is on fire around you, you don't want to be spend all the time fighting on these things, and then you turn up and go, oh, wait, well, there's nothing left here when we're fighting over it. So it's a hard time, and there's a lot and even when churches have failed, they've still done a lot of good. But there's an ability to say, we've done these things wrong. Or these things have changed and we need to adapt to them. And often it doesn't mean adapting your theology. It means adapting your approach and your expectations about who's in charge and how do you relate to your neighbors.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you if you could provide 3 things that Christian churches could do to win people back into the pew. What 3 things? I mean, I'm sort of sensing you sort of already answered one of them, just like change your approach, change your strategy. That seems like one of the 3 maybe.
One of the things I tell people, so people ask me this, right? And again, I start by saying I'm not a pastor, right? So I can't tell you what to do. But I would say one is to stop doing dumb things, right? That could be a real thing, right? That could be a big thing. Stop doing dumb things, which people do. And if you do something dumb, say you're sorry. That would go a long way. Because congregations don't understand what they're doing, how it looks to the outside, but also there are conflicts that you think, we've done something bad here, let's stop. So a second thing would be really to work on the kind of internal relationships that you have. It's I don't know if you've ever run, but there's a running program called Couch Potato to 5K, which is basically how to get you off the couch and so that you could run a 5K, you could run 35 minutes without stopping. And the way it does it by making people run a little bit at a time and you build up to it. Well, I think there's a lot of congregations that they're not couch potatoes, but they're not very strong, right? They don't have good internal relationships. Their relationships have been strained. They're not in a spot to do the hard work of an adaptation because they don't have trust. So there can be some internal work to say, like, how do we become healthy and focused and trust each other and have good relationships so that we can do the work of adaptation.
Yeah.
And then I think a third is to realize that the world's not going to go back to the way it was. And so that means you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to start thinking about, how do we become inviting to people? How do you become a spot that people might want to be part of? And that may mean giving up some authority. It may mean letting someone else be in charge. I tell a couple stories in the book about churches that have sort of been revitalized. One is more progressive, and they have done this by really being really focused on spiritual development. They're Methodists, and so I don't know if you know anything about the Methodist Church, but
yeah, that's fracturing.
Yes, it's fracturing, right? But how did Methodism grow? By method,
Yeah.
right? By meeting in small groups, by focus on spiritual development, by saying, okay, we take our faith really seriously, and we're going to say this is really important. Here's how we develop it. The other one is a church out in Seattle, which basically an older white congregation was renting space to a younger congregation that was multi-ethnic, and then decided to say, well, okay, that church is meeting our community in a way we can't. Why don't we join them? Instead of saying they should join us, they said we could join them and become part of that church and boost what they're doing. So there can be a way to say, like, can we find partners and other people who can do this better and let them carry on the torch? So there's kind of like, stop doing dumb things. There's the idea of, like, you've got to get internally strong to say, we're able to do this stuff, because it's going to be a marathon, right? The world is going to be different. It's not going to change. Yep. Rebuilding that will take time. And I guess maybe the fourth thing is just, and which is it's really the don't do dumb things. It's not, don't buy into the nonsense out there. There's so much noise and polarization. What we don't need is more people, being polarized.
Yeah. One of the tips that I've told people is sort of plays on 1 and 3 that you gave from that list. Previous generations, I'm 35, so previous generations have done some of this culture warring, and I've tried to communicate using this biblical imagery that people are trying to preserve Jerusalem, but it's gone. Mm-hmm. We are living the culture, society, we are living in Rome or Babylon. And the sooner that evangelical Christians realize that, I think the sooner we could be more constructive in how we can reach people with the gospel. So I think that sort of hits on your 1 and 3 there. Stop doing dumb things, change your strategy, because culture warring for the sake of culture warring isn't going to win souls over. And that's what we need to be focused on. And the sooner we realize we're living in Rome, the less furious we'll be when we read some news article about, some big, huge moral nonsense, what we think is moral nonsense. We won't be as outraged, and we can find constructive ways to reach people that we want to reach. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the points I'm making in the book, is that this is a different world. And so you have to adapt. It's not what I've told people is it's not your fault that the world changed.
Yeah.
But it is your problem, right? It's your challenge that you're going to have to adapt to.
Yep. Which is why I don't have a problem, in a sense, being back in Illinois, where there are a host of financial problems regarding the state government, and but they're just problems.
But everybody's got problems,
that's right?
Every part of the world has problems, and it is different to move from a place where churches were in charge to a place where you're not in charge anymore. Yeah. But you're still important, and you're still a valued part of the community. Can you be humble enough to say, okay, we have to be in relationship with people that we disagree
Yeah.
with.
Great. Bob, this has been a very intriguing interview, getting up to date on sort of the,
Yeah, been fun
the
to talk
state of
with
the
you.
church.
Yeah.
What's a good way that people can find out more about you and your work? Do you have a personal website or a profile at Religion News?
Yeah, so there's you can go to religionnews.com. You can find me on social media at Bob Smietana. I also have a website, bobsmietana.com.
Excellent. Great. Well, I'd love to see you, and I have no idea what you look like. Hopefully, momentarily, I'll find out here.
Great to meet. Nice look.
Oh, thanks. I was gonna say, yeah, bald, and you've got goatee, whereas I've got the fuller beard. And what's behind you on the wall there? Are those awards?
Oh, there's some awards, yeah. And then I have a whole bunch of religious knickknacks.
Nice. Tell me about the awards.
I
So
have
those for articles?
From the Religion News Association. Yeah, from our articles from the Religion News Association. It's our professional group.
Wonderful. Well, Bob, we'll be sure to put a link to your book, Reorganized Religion,
Great.
with the video, and we'll put a link to your profile as well and your personal website. But it's been really great to chat with you.
It's been fun, and I hope these interviews go well.
Yeah,
for you.
thanks. It's a lot of fun, and I get to meet new people just like this. You know, otherwise, our circles, I don't know that I would have.
I don't know if we met, so I'm great.
Yeah,
Great to meet
likewise.
you.
Thanks, and I hope we'll be in touch.
All right.
Take care, Bob.
Take care.